Imagine walking into a quiet little diner on the edge of a forgotten town. The kind of place with peeling wallpaper, flickering neon lights, and a dusty jukebox that hasn't played a note in years. You glance around, maybe wrinkle your nose a little, wondering if you made a mistake. Then, out of nowhere, you hear it. Someone behind you mutters loud enough for everyone to hear, "This place is a dump." The room falls silent. Eyes shift. Forks stop midair. And then the owner, a man with tired eyes and calloused hands, steps out from the kitchen. But instead of arguing or throwing the guy out, he simply says, "Let me tell you a story." And that's where everything changes. Now hold on, because what you're about to hear is not just a story about a diner or a rude customer. This is about legacy, about the ghosts that live in the floorboards, about how something that looks broken on the surface might be hiding a truth so powerful, it'll make you question every judgment you've ever made about people, places, and even yourself. I'm not here to give you clickbait or some recycled internet tale. I'm about to give you the real story, the one you came for. The one that answers the question that probably brought you to this video in the first place. Why did that man call it a dump? And why did the owner's response stop him cold? I promise you this, you're going to find out. But what you uncover might just hit you deeper than you expected. Before we dive in, let me just say this. If you've ever judged something at first glance, if you've ever walked into a place and thought, "What a mess," or looked at someone and dismissed them without knowing what they've been through, then this story is for you. Because behind every cracked tile, every faded sign, and every scar on someone's face, there's usually a reason, a history, and sometimes a lesson waiting to be heard. And trust me, this one's going to stick with you long after the video ends. So sit tight, lean in, and stay with me because the twist at the end, you're not going to see it coming. And that's not just a tease. That's a promise. This isn't just some angry customer versus small business clip that you forget in 5 minutes. No, what happened inside this old diner became a turning point not just for the man who insulted it, but for everyone who heard what happened next, including me. And I want to take you there, step by step, so you feel like you were in the room when it all went down. Let me paint the picture. It's a sleepy Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the world seems to be taking a breath. Outside, the streets are mostly empty except for the occasional truck rolling by and a dog lazily stretched across a sunlit patch of sidewalk. The diner, named Rosie's Corner, sits quietly at the far end of Main Street, with a weathered wooden sign barely hanging on. You wouldn't give it a second glance. Most people don't. But it's still open, still serving, still holding on. Inside, a few regulars sit at their usual booths, sipping coffee and flipping through worn-out newspapers. The waitress, Lisa, moves between tables with a tired smile, doing her best to make things feel normal. And in the back, that's where we find Earl, the owner, quietly flipping pancakes and frying bacon like he's done every day for the last 40 years. Now here's where things shift. Because that's when the customer walks in. Young, clean-cut, probably new to town. The kind of guy who expects Wi-Fi, farm-to-table menus, and modern lighting. And almost immediately, you can see it in his face. The disgust, the judgment, the smirk of superiority. He sits, looks around, then says it. Loudly. Carelessly. "This place is a dump." He laughs. Doesn't care who hears it. Thinks he's just being honest. Thinks he's better than the room he's in. But what he doesn't realize is that Rosie's Corner isn't just a diner. It's a time capsule, a war memorial, a family scrapbook. And when Earl hears those words, something inside him shifts, but not in anger, in resolve. Now I need you to hear me out, because this is the part where most people would explode, throw the guy out, or fire back with some angry rant. But Earl does something very different. He walks out from the kitchen, wipes his hands on a towel, looks the young man dead in the eye, and says with quiet calm, "Son, if you've got a minute, let me tell you what this dump really is." And then he begins to talk. That's when the room changes. That's when time slows. And that's when you'll feel it, the weight, the emotion, the gravity of what this place really holds. Because what Earl reveals isn't just a history lesson, it's a story about love, loss, sacrifice, and survival. It's a story that involves soldiers, single mothers, and a community that refused to let go when the world moved on. It's about what was built here, who bled for it, and why the chipped paint on the walls is more valuable than any marble countertop. You're going to want to hear what he says. You're going to want to know why this diner still stands. Because the truth, the real history of this place, it's not just powerful. It's unforgettable. And it's going to change the way you look at every dump you ever pass by. I'm telling you right now, if you skip to the end, you're going to miss the moment where it all clicks together. You're going to miss the goosebumps. You're going to miss the payoff that makes every second worth it. So, do yourself a favor, stick with me. Because the customer who walked in thinking he was better than everyone else? Let's just say by the end of Earl's story, he wasn't laughing anymore. And what he did next shocked everyone in that room. Including Earl. Including Lisa. Including me. And maybe, just maybe, it'll shock you too. But before I reveal that moment, before I tell you how the story ends, there's something else you need to know. Something Earl said right in the middle of that conversation that changed everything. Earl didn't speak like a man defending his reputation. He spoke like a man preserving a legacy. The kind of voice that doesn't rise in volume, but sinks deep into your chest with every word. And as the regulars sat frozen, and even the rude customer fumbled with his napkin to hide his sudden discomfort, Earl's story began to unspool like a roll of old film dug out of a forgotten attic. You could feel the shift in the air. The diner was no longer just a room with cracked tiles and coffee-stained menus. It became a stage, a place where time folded back on itself. And the story Earl began to tell wasn't just his. It was about a town that fought to stay on the map, about choices made under pressure, and about one moment, one choice, that changed everything. He started with Rosie, his late wife, the soul of the diner, and the reason it existed. Back in the early 70s, this wasn't some rundown corner joint. It was a hub. People lined up around the block just to get a seat on Sunday mornings. Rosie's Corner was known for its homemade pies, bottomless coffee, and the way Rosie remembered every customer's name, even if they hadn't stopped by in years. But after Rosie passed, suddenly and without warning, something in Earl broke. He kept the place open, but the life had gone out of it. The jukebox stopped getting new records. The wallpaper peeled without being replaced. The pie recipes? Locked in a drawer Earl hadn't opened since the funeral. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't know how to keep going without her. Every booth, every stain, every plate she once touched, it was sacred now. Untouchable. So while the world outside modernized and moved on, Earl preserved the diner like a museum of memories. But that wasn't all. What most people didn't know, what that judgmental customer certainly didn't know, is that the diner had been much more than a place to eat. During the economic crash, Rosie's Corner became an unofficial food bank. Earl and Rosie fed dozens of struggling families who couldn't pay. During the floods in '98, they opened their doors 24/7 to stranded travelers and families whose homes were underwater. Earl even mortgaged the place twice just to keep the lights on, not for himself, but to keep serving a community that was falling apart. But those aren't the things you see when you walk in and see a broken light bulb or a cracked counter. You don't see the nights Earl slept in a booth, the mornings he cooked for veterans on fixed incomes, or the time he saved a teenage runaway by giving her a job and a place to stay in the back room for 6 months. All of that, it's invisible, unless you know where to look. And yet, even as Earl spoke, something strange lingered in the air. Something unspoken. There were details he kept skipping, pauses that lasted a bit too long, glances exchanged between Lisa and a regular sitting near the window. It was subtle, but it was there. Earl wasn't just giving a speech to defend his diner. He was carefully navigating around something, avoiding it. And if you were paying attention, and I was, you could feel it. That tension. That barely visible thread in the room that felt like it might snap at any moment. The young customer, his name was Kyle, by the way, wasn't just some loudmouth passing through. He was new in town, yes, but he wasn't just wandering. He had a camera bag slung over his shoulder when he walked in, and he kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. He claimed he was just there for a bite before heading back out to shoot some B-roll for his vlog. But Lisa mentioned later that he'd been in town for 3 days already, asking questions. About the diner. About Earl. About a piece of land behind the building that nobody had touched in years. It turns out Kyle was a real estate scout, not a food vlogger. He was documenting dying small towns in America for a YouTube series. The kind that gets millions of views by showcasing decay and forgotten places. He wasn't just mocking the diner, he was baiting Earl. Fishing for a reaction. Trying to catch that perfect viral moment where a grumpy old man loses it in front of a camera. But Kyle hadn't done enough homework. He didn't realize that this dump was part of a deeper, still unfolding story, one with roots that went beyond old wallpaper and burnt coffee. And the more questions he asked, the more something didn't add up. Because someone in town had been feeding him information, guiding him. There were rumors swirling for years that the land Rosie's corner sat on was worth far more than anyone admitted. Some whispered that a tech firm once tried to buy it out, but Earl refused. Others claimed there was something buried beneath the lot, an old Prohibition tunnel, maybe, or deeds tied to forgotten family names. Whatever it was, people had been sniffing around for decades. Quietly, carefully. But now it felt like something or someone was pushing harder. As Earl told his story, Kyle kept shifting in his seat. Not because he felt guilty, but because he was waiting for the part he really wanted, the part Earl wasn't giving. The part about the backroom fire that happened 6 years ago. The fire nobody reported to insurance. The fire that closed the diner for 2 weeks, but was quickly swept under the rug. Kyle had asked about it at the local library. He pulled up old zoning permits. He even tracked down a former waitress who claimed Rosie had been keeping a ledger of secret donations to struggling families. But that ledger? It vanished after she died. And ever since, people have whispered about what else Rosie might have hidden in that diner. Because Rosie wasn't just sweet. She was savvy. And Earl? He wasn't just grieving. He was guarding something. That's when I started to wonder if Earl had been keeping more than just memories in that old building. Because if the rumors were true, if that diner was sitting on something bigger than anyone realized, then Earl wasn't just telling Kyle off to protect his pride. He was protecting a secret. One Rosie took to her grave. And the question that started to burn in my mind, as Earl's voice dropped lower and the room got quieter, was this. What was Kyle really after? Who sent him? And why was Lisa, loyal, sweet Lisa, acting so nervous every time Earl mentioned the fire? As Earl wrapped up his story with a small smile and a shrug, the room broke into applause. Not loud, just respectful. But Kyle didn't clap. He sat still, eyes narrowed, fingers drumming his phone. He looked like a man who had just found a clue, a missing piece. And just before he stood to leave, he leaned forward and said something to Earl that nobody else heard, but Earl's face went pale. And Lisa? She dropped the coffee pot. Whatever Kyle said, it hit a nerve. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something big was hiding under the surface of this sleepy little diner. And we were only just beginning to uncover it. The next morning, the diner felt different. The clinking of silverware wasn't as loud, the conversations a little more hushed, like everyone sensed something had shifted overnight. Earl showed up at his usual hour, but his gait was slower, his eyes heavier. Lisa was already there, but she wasn't her usual self. She barely spoke, her smile faded, and her hands trembled each time she poured coffee. There was an unspoken tension between them now, like a wire stretched too tight. And it didn't take long before the first real crack appeared, because something important had gone missing. That old black and white photo of Rosie, the one that hung near the register for over 30 years, was suddenly gone. No frame, no glass, not even the nail that once held it. Earl noticed it right away. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a long time, staring at the empty spot on the wall like a man trying to remember where he left something he never thought he'd lose. And then, quietly, he walked to the back room and shut the door. But he didn't stay gone for long. Moments later, he burst out, angry, wild-eyed, and clearly rattled. The drawer where he kept Rosie's old recipe book, the one locked since her passing, had been forced open. And the book? Gone too. It didn't make sense. Who would want an old recipe book and a dusty photo? Unless it wasn't about food. Earl sat Lisa down and asked her, point blank, if she'd noticed anything strange the night before. She hesitated. Then, with a voice so low it was barely audible, she admitted she'd seen Kyle hanging around outside after closing. Said she thought he was just getting B-roll for his video, filming the sign, or maybe catching a quiet night shot. But now she wasn't so sure. He wasn't just filming, he was watching, waiting, maybe even listening. And now, with the items gone and Kyle nowhere in sight, things were starting to feel far more serious than just a rude customer looking for internet clout. Earl decided to call the sheriff, a man named Hank Beasley, who'd grown up on Rosie's Pies and had been a quiet regular ever since. But Hank didn't exactly jump into action. He listened, nodded slowly, then said, I wouldn't worry too much about an old photo and a recipe book, Earl. Probably just fell or got misplaced. You've had a lot on your mind. It was the kind of response meant to calm nerves, but something about Hank's tone felt off. Like he knew more than he was letting on. Earl pressed him. Brought up Kyle. Brought up the fire from years ago. But Hank cut him off, suddenly stern. Let it be, Earl. You start digging up old ghosts, you might not like what you find. And with that he left. No report, no search, just a warning. That night, Earl didn't go home. He stayed at the diner, sitting in the booth where he and Rosie had first dreamed up the place. He stared out the window, replaying every conversation he'd had with Kyle, every quiet glance Lisa had given him, every rumor he'd tried to ignore. That's when it came back to him, something Rosie once said years ago. Something about a ledger. Not the one she used for accounting, but a private one. A journal she kept in case something ever happened to her. He remembered laughing it off, thinking she was being overly cautious. But Rosie had always been the type to think 5 moves ahead. And now it was the only lead he had left. Earl waited until the sun came up, then walked across town to the library. Not to the front desk, but to the archives in the back, where the town's oldest records and forgotten documents were stored. And there, between 2 dusty blueprints of downtown, he found it, a manila folder marked Rosalie Mercer, 1974. Inside, there were newspaper clippings, old donation records, and a hand-scribbled note in Rosie's handwriting. But the last page caught his breath. It was a map, a rough sketch of the diner's layout. Only, this one showed something extra. A small square behind the kitchen. A space that didn't show up in any blueprints. A room that shouldn't exist. He rushed back to the diner, ignoring Lisa's questions, heading straight to the kitchen. With a crowbar in hand, he started tearing up the floorboard under the old freezer, just where the map said. And after a few tense minutes, the wood gave way to reveal a hatch. Rusted, but still intact. As he pried it open, a wave of cold air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying with it the scent of earth and time. Earl climbed down carefully, flashlight in hand. The space was tight, silent, and damp. And at the far end, tucked behind an old support beam, was a lockbox. He pulled it out, dusted it off, and opened it. But inside, nothing. Just a torn scrap of paper with 2 words written in Rosie's handwriting. Trust no one. That's when he heard it. The hatch above, closing. Then the sound of it being locked from the outside. Earl was trapped. And someone up there didn't want him to uncover what was hidden beneath Rosie's corner. The real question now wasn't just what Rosie was trying to protect. It was who she was trying to protect it from. Back on the surface, Lisa paced the floor of the diner, unaware of what had just happened beneath her feet. She kept glancing at the clock, nervously twisting the ring on her finger, a habit she hadn't had in years, but which always returned when something felt wrong. Earl had disappeared into the back half an hour ago without a word, and something about the way he moved, the urgency in his voice, had set her on edge. The lunch rush was looming, but her mind was elsewhere, spinning with fragments of thoughts and half-remembered warnings that now, in the quiet hum of the kitchen, felt heavier than they ever had before. Just as she was about to head to the back herself, the diner phone rang, an old rotary model that rarely made a sound anymore since most folks use cell phones these days. But when Lisa picked up, the voice on the other end froze her blood cold. It was a woman, older, calm but sharp, with a voice that seemed familiar but distorted somehow, as though pulled from a dream she couldn't fully recall. The caller didn't introduce herself, didn't ask for anyone by name. She simply said, "Rosie left more than just memories behind. You know that, don't you? Check the ledger. Page 17. You'll find what you need, but don't trust Earl. Not yet." Then the line went dead. No number on the caller ID. Nothing to trace. Lisa stood there for a long moment, the phone still in her hand, her heart racing. She wanted to dismiss it as a prank, some weird joke. But the mention of the ledger, Rosie's private book, the one that had just gone missing, was too specific, too real. And worse, it left her with a question she didn't know how to ask. Could Earl, the man she trusted like family, be hiding something even deeper? Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Lisa went to Earl's office and began searching. She dug through file cabinets, opened drawers she'd never touched before, pulled up floor mats, and lifted the lid on a tin box of old receipts. At the very bottom of a locked filing cabinet, she found it, a slim, leather-bound book with Rosie's name embossed on the spine. Not the cookbook. Not the one everyone thought was stolen. This was different. Handwritten notes, taped in clippings, and ledger-style entries with names, dates, and dollar amounts. But page 17 was marked with something else, a single photograph. Faded and curling at the edges, it showed three people: Rosie, a much younger Earl, and a man Lisa didn't recognize. They were standing in front of the diner, arms linked, smiling wide. But scribbled on the back of the photo were just 4 words: "He knows. Keep quiet." That's when Lisa's phone buzzed. A new message. No sender. Just a photo of the same picture she now held in her hands, only this version had a red X drawn through the unknown man's face. A second message followed. "It's happening again. Stay out of it." At that exact moment, trapped below in the crawlspace with no way out, Earl was replaying his life in fragments. Rosie's laughter in the early years. The slow death of her trust after that fire. The secrets they'd agreed to bury after that terrible night in '85. But now, he was sure someone had unearthed it all. Someone who wasn't supposed to know anything. And as the chill crept up from the earth beneath him, he started to realize this wasn't just about a photo or a recipe, or even a diner's history. This was about something bigger. Someone wanted Rosie's story rewritten, or completely erased. Meanwhile, across town, the man in the photo with the red X was very much alive. He went by the name Harold Givens now, but 35 years ago, he was just Red, Rosie's business partner, the co-founder of the diner, and the man who vanished the night the original diner burned to the ground. Everyone assumed he'd died in the blaze. His body never recovered, his name etched quietly into memory, but never spoken aloud again. But Red hadn't died. He'd run. And now, for reasons no one yet understood, he was back. Sitting in the corner of a dingy motel room just outside town, watching a live stream of the diner through a hidden camera he'd somehow installed in the sign out front. He saw Lisa pick up the call. He saw her find the book. And he knew exactly what was coming next. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers and whispered to himself, "Too soon. She wasn't supposed to dig that deep. Not yet." The stakes were no longer just about a ruined reputation or a vandalized business. Now it was about survival. The diner was no longer just a setting. It was the center of a storm decades in the making. With each passing minute, more pieces of the puzzle came into view, and every answer seemed to open 2 new questions. Who was sending the messages? Why was Red hiding for over 3 decades? And most importantly, why did Rosie Wright trust no one? Because maybe, just maybe, she knew this day would come. And if so, it meant she'd left more behind than a recipe book or a ledger. She'd left behind a trap. And someone had just triggered it. The first sign that something was truly wrong came not in the form of a threat, but in the unnatural silence that crept in where sound should have been. After finding the ledger and receiving the anonymous message, Lisa tried to call Earl's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Not unusual for him, maybe. He often left it behind or forgot to charge it. But what struck her now was the sudden, oppressive quiet inside the diner, an emptiness that didn't match the time of day. It was nearly lunchtime, but not a single customer had walked in. No chime of the door, no clatter of dishes, no familiar voices. She stood behind the counter, hands resting on the worn-out laminate, staring through the front windows like something might appear and explain this. But the street was empty. No traffic. No pedestrians. Not even the mailman. Just an eerie stillness that made the hair on her arms rise without warning. Then came the sound. Subtle at first. A soft scraping on the back door, like someone testing the lock. Lisa froze. She didn't move toward the door, didn't even blink. Her mind began racing through every possibility. Maybe it was just a stray cat. Maybe the wind. Maybe Earl. But when she moved slowly toward the kitchen and peeked through the narrow window above the sink, she saw the figure. A man in a black hoodie, face obscured by the shadow of his cap, standing completely still just a few feet from the back entrance. He wasn't trying to get in anymore. He was just standing there, watching. And the second Lisa made eye contact through the glass, he turned and walked away, deliberate, slow, like he had all the time in the world. But before he disappeared behind the dumpster, he lifted his hand and pointed at her. Not with a gun. Not with a weapon. Just a single, accusing finger. That's when she knew this wasn't just about the diner's past. This was about her. She ran back to the office, her breath uneven, heart hammering in her chest. She locked the doors, pulled the blinds, and turned on the security cameras Earl had installed years ago, but rarely used. Most of them were dusty and flickering, but two were clear enough to show what she needed to see. The man in the hoodie had circled the building twice. He hadn't tried to enter again, but he knew where every camera was and never once looked directly into them. He was trained, methodical, and that terrified her more than anything else. She tried to call the police, but the line was dead. Not just the phone at the diner, her cell too. No signal. No bars. Just a spinning loading icon and the chilling sense that someone had cut them off on purpose. Lisa wasn't naive. She'd lived through enough real-life trouble to know the difference between paranoia and danger, and this was something real. Someone had eyes on her. Someone wanted to silence her. She locked herself in the storeroom and clutched the ledger against her chest like it was the last piece of the puzzle she had any control over. Every sound became a threat. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind against the windows sent her mind into overdrive. She thought about Earl. Where was he? Had he ever made it out of the basement crawl space? Or had someone found him first? And that man in the photo, the one with the red X, was he the one in the hoodie? Or was this something even bigger? Then she remembered something she hadn't thought about in years. A story Rosie once told her when she was barely 20, fresh out of culinary school and full of ambition. Rosie had pulled her aside one late night after closing and said, "If this place ever starts to feel too quiet, like the silence is pressing in, that means they're watching again. They always watch in silence." Lisa had laughed back then, thinking it was just one of Rosie's colorful metaphors for slow business or bad weather. But now it didn't feel like a metaphor at all. It felt like a warning. And it had finally come true. She opened the ledger to page 17 again, this time looking beyond the photo and scribbles. She noticed something she'd missed earlier, a pressed flower between the pages.
Dry.
Fragile. Purple. It triggered a memory. Rosie's funeral. The same flower had been pinned to every mourner's lapel, handed out by a man Lisa didn't recognize. He never spoke, never cried. Just stood in the back of the service, then vanished. The man in the hoodie? She didn't have time to piece it all together before the power went out. The lights flickered, then died. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of the soda machine. Everything fell into darkness. And that's when the banging started. Not from the front. Not from the back. From underneath. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From the floor. Lisa backed up against the far wall of the storeroom, the reality setting in with brutal clarity. Someone or something was in the crawl space. Either Earl was alive and trying to signal her, or someone else had gotten to him first. And if that was true, then she was next. The ledger fell from her hands, pages fanning out across the floor like the wings of some dying bird. She reached down to gather it, her fingers trembling, her mind torn between fight and flight. But before she could decide, her phone lit up with a single notification. No name, no number, just one message. You were never supposed to open the book. And with that, the door handle behind her began to turn. The door creaked open slowly, but it wasn't the man in the hoodie. It wasn't Earl. It was someone Lisa hadn't seen in years, someone she never expected to see again, especially not in the middle of a blackout, in a locked storeroom, inside a diner that now felt more like a trap than a safe place. It was Marla Dawson, Rosie's sister. The same Marla who had stormed out of the diner a decade ago after a bitter family dispute. The same Marla who swore never to return and hadn't spoken a word to anyone in town since. She looked older, yes, but her face was unmistakable. Sharp features, stormy eyes, and that same aura of tightly controlled rage wrapped in politeness. We need to talk, Marla said flatly, stepping inside like she owned the place.
Now.
Lisa didn't know what to say. Every instinct in her body told her to ask questions, to demand answers, to scream. But something in Marla's face stopped her. There was fear there, not panic, but deep, cold, calculated fear. The kind of fear that only came from knowing something dangerous and carrying the weight of it for too long. Marla glanced at the ledger on the floor and immediately scooped it up with both hands. You opened it, she said, not with surprise, but with quiet disappointment. You weren't supposed to open it. Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper.
Why?
What is this? What's happening? Marla didn't answer right away. She sat down, right there on the storeroom floor, like they were two kids whispering secrets during a sleepover. The diner isn't what you think it is, she finally said. Rosie wasn't just a cook, Earl wasn't just a mechanic, and this wasn't just a business. It was a front, a hiding place. And that ledger? That's not a list of debts or inventory. It's a key. Lisa felt her breath catch. A key to what? Marla leaned in. To the people they were protecting. The people who didn't want to be found. And then the story shattered like glass. Rosie and Earl had been part of something far bigger than the town ever knew. Back in the 80s and 90s, when witness protection programs were overloaded and underfunded, certain trusted civilians were brought in to help relocate high-profile witnesses, the kind the government couldn't risk losing. The diner, it turned out, had been one of those safe houses. A stop on a network that stretched across state lines, each run by people who could be trusted to take in someone new, give them a job, a roof, a backstory. The photo with the red X wasn't a threat. It was a warning. That man had broken the rules, blown his cover, and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The ledger contained aliases, dates, and notes about people who were now living normal lives with new names, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could destroy all of them. Lisa tried to process it. But why now? Why is someone coming after me? Marla's eyes darkened. Because someone close to us sold the information, and they think you're the last link to the truth. That's when Lisa understood. This wasn't about the diner's history. It was about covering it up. Someone in their circle had betrayed them, and the man in the hoodie wasn't just some anonymous threat. He was the cleanup, the enforcer. And he wasn't after revenge. He was after silence. Marla pulled out an old burner phone and showed Lisa a video. It was grainy, taken from a security camera in another town, dated just 3 days earlier. It showed Earl,
Alive.
meeting someone in a dark alley. The video cut out just as the other figure stepped into the light, and what Lisa saw made her stomach twist. It was the sheriff. Sheriff Harlan, the same man who had been eating free pie at the counter every Sunday for years. The same man who always joked about retiring and fishing full-time. He had been part of it all from the beginning, and now he was eliminating anyone who could expose the truth. Lisa staggered back, feeling the weight of it all crash down on her at once. Earl wasn't missing, he was running. Or hiding. Or worse, he had been captured. Sheriff Harlan, the one man everyone trusted, was the one orchestrating the cover-up. And Lisa? She was the wild card no one accounted for, the one person who had stumbled onto the truth at the worst possible time. But the final twist didn't come from Marla. It came from a voice, deep, slow, measured, coming from the diner's speaker system, which had somehow powered back on despite the outage. "You were warned," the voice said. "You could have walked away." Lisa turned toward the sound, heart pounding in her ears. The voice wasn't Earl's. It wasn't Harlan's. It was someone she hadn't heard in years, but recognized instantly. Her own father. A man she believed had died in a car accident when she was 16. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew unraveled completely. Lisa sat at the worn wooden table, her fingers nervously tracing the coffee stain on the faded napkin. Her mother sat across from her, looking tired but calm, her hands folded neatly on the table. The morning light filtered through the small diner window, casting long shadows across the floor, making the space feel both familiar and foreign at once. Lisa had always believed that, after everything, the hardest part was behind her. That now, she could just live her life, let things settle and move on. But the truth was, she was trapped in a loop of uncertainty that seemed to deepen with every passing day. Just when she thought she understood what had happened, another layer of the mystery would surface, threatening to undo everything she thought she knew. It all started when Lisa received a letter from a lawyer in another state, someone she didn't recognize and certainly didn't trust. The letter was short, formal, and yet it carried an undeniable weight. It said that the truth about her father's dealings, his underground operations, his connections, and the people who had been involved, was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Her father's legacy, the network he had built and buried in secret, wasn't as dead as it seemed. The letter hinted at an even more dangerous element to the entire operation, something deeper, something darker. The message was clear. Lisa's fight wasn't just for closure, but for survival. And someone didn't want her to keep digging. Her mind raced, torn between disbelief and the nagging, gut-wrenching suspicion that the lawyer's words were more than just a threat. The town had moved on. People had stopped whispering, stopped looking over their shoulders, but Lisa knew that the truth had a way of resurfacing when you least expected it. And this letter, this cryptic, ominous piece of paper, was proof that things were far from over. But who sent it? Why now? Her mother's face betrayed none of the worry Lisa felt in her gut. Marla's calmness was always a mask, but today it felt particularly unsettling. Lisa's eyes flickered to her mother's hands, still tightly clasped together, as if she were preparing herself for something. It wasn't until Lisa asked her point-blank, "What do you know about this?" that the facade cracked. For a long moment, Marla didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Lisa's heart beat faster. She had never seen her mother look so distant. Finally, Marla spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lisa, you need to stop. It's not what you think." The words sent a chill down Lisa's spine. What wasn't what she thought? How long had her mother known more than she was letting on? Had Marla been a part of the web of lies, too? Or had she just been too afraid to speak the truth? Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat as the weight of her mother's words hit her. The choices she now faced were as impossible as they were terrifying. On one hand, the path forward was clear. She could stop digging, protect herself and her mother, and pretend the past never happened. But the truth was, she couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her. If she stopped now, would she be complicit in something bigger than she could ever imagine? On the other hand, there was the option to keep going, expose the remaining layers of the conspiracy, and face the consequences, whatever they might be. But in doing so, Lisa risked not just her life, but everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore, it was about surviving it. And the people who had been behind her father's operation were not the kind to let the past be uncovered so easily. Suddenly, the door to the diner swung open with a loud creak, and in walked Raynor, the deputy who had been a lifeline throughout the ordeal. His expression was grim, and Lisa could immediately tell that something was wrong. He didn't look at her directly. His eyes darted around, as if he were looking for something or someone. His hand slid into his jacket pocket, and he pulled out an envelope, the same kind of thick, official-looking envelope she had received just days earlier. "Lisa," Raynor said, his voice low and strained, "I need you to listen carefully. You're being watched." He glanced over his shoulder as he spoke, his tone urgent. "Not by the people you think, but by someone else. Someone connected to your father's old network. I didn't want to scare you, but you need to know the full extent of it. This is bigger than I ever thought." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She had been so sure that everything had been uncovered, that the people behind her father's crimes were gone. But Raynor's words shattered that illusion. The truth, she realized, was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Someone out there wanted her to stop digging, and if she didn't, they wouldn't hesitate to make her regret it. Raynor's eyes softened as he continued, "Listen, you've got to get out of here. You need to lay low for a while. This is more dangerous than I can explain right now. They're coming for you. I don't know who or why," but he hesitated, as if weighing whether to say the next part. "Someone close to you is involved. I don't know who it is, but they've been feeding information." Lisa's mind was racing, trying to process the weight of his words. A betrayal. Someone she trusted was working against her, feeding information to the very people who had caused all this damage. She felt the walls closing in, suffocating her. She had no idea who to trust anymore. And worse, the people she thought were on her side were now the ones who might be the greatest threat. Raynor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm doing everything I can to protect you, but this isn't over. I need you to make a decision, and fast. The longer you stay, the more danger you put yourself in." The urgency in his voice struck a chord with Lisa, and she knew that whatever decision she made in the coming hours could very well be a matter of life and death. Torn between the promise of safety and the overwhelming need to uncover the truth, Lisa faced an impossible choice. She could leave everything behind, disappear into the shadows, and try to start fresh. But what if the truth was too dangerous to be left buried? Or she could continue her search, risking everything to expose a conspiracy that threatened to take down everyone she loved. The diner, the place she had once thought was a haven, now felt like a trap. Lisa was no longer just fighting for answers, she was fighting for survival. She knew the stakes were higher than ever, but there was one thing she was certain of. There was no turning back now. The storm that had been quietly brewing behind the scenes finally broke with terrifying force. Lisa barely had time to think after receiving the text. Her hands trembled, her thoughts tangled in a knot of fear and disbelief. Marla was being held hostage, and the message wasn't just a threat, it was a line drawn in blood. She had 24 hours to abandon everything or lose the one person who had stood by her when no one else would. But something about the photo nagged at her. The chipped paint on the wall, the overhead pipe with a faded red stripe, it was familiar. And then it hit her. That wasn't some random basement or secret hideout. That was the old cannery just off Route 9, the one that shut down after a mysterious fire a few years back. She'd passed it hundreds of times growing up, never giving it a second glance. Now it was a prison and maybe a grave. But Lisa wasn't walking away.
Not now.
Not when she was this close. She drove like a woman possessed, weaving through the night like it was chasing her. The closer she got, the more pieces started snapping into place. The threats, the silence, the disappearances. It wasn't just about her father's ledger or some underground protection network. It was a power structure, a decades-old web of corruption rooted in the town itself. Her father hadn't just helped people vanish. He had worked with local officials, police officers, even church leaders who had all used the network to clean up their own sins. What had started as a noble cause had rotted from the inside out, transformed into a weapon used to erase inconvenient truths. And now someone was trying to erase her. As she pulled up to the back of the cannery, Lisa killed the engine and moved quietly. The place reeked of old oil and rust, the scent of decay soaking into the humid night air. Her flashlight barely cut through the darkness as she stepped over broken glass and into the building. She followed the sound of a faint metallic drip echoing in the distance, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. But just as she reached the basement stairs, she heard a voice. A voice she knew. "Lisa, stop." She spun around, breath caught in her throat. It was Deputy Rayner, the same officer who had pulled her over for a busted taillight 2 weeks ago. The same man who'd always checked in on her family after her father's supposed death. A face she'd grown up trusting. But the gun in his hand told her trust had been misplaced. "I didn't want to be part of this," he said, his voice low and grim. "But they have my daughter. I tried to warn you off back at the diner. You wouldn't listen." Lisa's mind raced. "You're working with them?" "I'm trying to survive," he snapped. "You don't know what these people are capable of. Your dad. He built something too big. He lost control a long time ago. And now the wrong people run it. People who don't think twice about killing anyone who talks. So why help them now?" she demanded, edging toward a rusted support beam, eyeing a jagged piece of rebar on the ground. "Why not tell me the truth? Because the truth will bury all of us." In one fluid motion, Lisa dove, grabbing the rebar and swinging up with everything she had. It struck his hand, sending the gun clattering across the floor. She didn't wait, she ran. Down the stairs, heart hammering, lungs burning, deeper into the belly of the beast. She found Marla tied to a chair in the center of the room, blood trickling from her temple, eyes wide with terror. Lisa dropped to her knees, cutting the ropes with a shard of glass. But before they could move, another voice echoed from the shadows. "Well done, Lisa. You really are your father's daughter." From the far side of the basement stepped a woman Lisa had never seen before, tall, commanding, dressed in a suit far too expensive for a town this small. But her face looked familiar. Too familiar. "I knew your father. Worked with him for years," the woman said, circling them like a vulture. "He had vision. But he lacked discipline. You? You might be exactly what we need." Lisa stood slowly, shielding Marla. "Who are you?" "Let's just say I'm the one cleaning up his mess. And here's your choice. Join us, take his place. Or we make sure you and your friend disappear, just like all the others." It wasn't just about her anymore. The conspiracies stretched across counties, across years. Her father had built something monstrous, and now the people feeding off it wanted her to take his throne. It was no longer a story about a rundown diner or a forgotten ledger. It was a war for control over truth itself, and Lisa was standing at the center. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another photo. This time, it wasn't Marla. It was her mother. The air in the basement thickened like wet concrete as Lisa stared at the image on her phone, her mother bound and unconscious in what looked like a hospital room stripped bare. Wires dangled from the ceiling, and an 4-bag hung loosely from a bent stand. But it wasn't the photo that broke her. It was the timestamp. It had been taken just 3 minutes ago. Whoever was doing this wasn't just threatening her, they were orchestrating everything in real time. And now, with Marla barely conscious behind her and this woman circling like a wolf, Lisa knew she couldn't afford a single misstep. Every second was a countdown, and every word could either save or destroy what was left of her world. Lisa didn't flinch. She raised her eyes to the woman's and held her gaze. "You think I'm going to join you just because you threaten the people I love," she said, voice trembling but defiant. "You've misjudged me, just like you misjudged him." The woman smiled faintly, like she was watching a child pretend to be a soldier. "Oh, Lisa, this was never about choice. Your father made one, and now it's your turn. You have no idea what he was really involved in, do you?" She tossed a file across the table, its pages spilling open like a wound. Lisa saw her father's name, stamped in red ink, and dozens of others, names of people who had mysteriously disappeared over the years. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. Victims. Witnesses. Whistleblowers. The network he built hadn't just helped people escape bad situations. It had buried others to protect them. He had become both savior and executioner. "You think he died in that fire?" the woman whispered, leaning in closer.
"No, Lisa."
"He lit it." The truth hit her like a freight train. All the stories, all the questions that never had answers, it was all deliberate. Her father had faked his death to escape the very thing he created. And this woman? She hadn't taken over the operation. She'd inherited it. From him. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Where is he? Oh, he's alive, the woman said, smiling coldly. And I think it's time you met him. The metal door creaked open, and in stepped a man whose face Lisa hadn't seen in over a decade. Older, grayer, eyes heavy with guilt, but unmistakably her father. For a moment, time stood still. Every memory, every unanswered question, every moment she'd mourned him slammed into her like a tidal wave. Her knees nearly gave out. I'm sorry, he said softly. I had to protect you. Lisa's voice cracked. By letting Mom and me think you were dead? By building a machine that kills innocent people and then walking away? He stepped closer, hand raised, eyes pleading. You don't understand. I didn't walk away. I've been watching, waiting, hoping you'd never get pulled into this. But now it's out of control, and you're the only one who can fix it. The woman laughed bitterly. Still clinging to that hero complex, huh? You think she's going to fix this mess for you? Lisa stepped between them, her heart racing like a war drum.
No.
But I'll end it. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the one thing they hadn't counted on, a flash drive. Inside it was everything, every file, every document she'd uncovered, every name connected to the operation. And she'd already sent copies to trusted journalists across the country. A failsafe. This goes public if anything happens to me, my mother or Marla, she said, eyes locked on the woman. You want your empire to survive? Let us walk out of here. The woman's expression cracked just slightly, but the arrogance returned as quickly as it vanished. You think exposing this will end it? People don't care. Not really. They'll be outraged for a week, and then they'll move on. Lisa didn't blink. Maybe. But you'll be running for the rest of your life. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. From the shadows behind the woman, Deputy Rayner emerged, bruised and bloodied but alive, and he wasn't alone. With him were two federal agents Lisa didn't recognize, guns drawn, badges raised. Rayner had made a deal. The wire in his pocket had captured everything. Every confession. Every threat. Every name. You were right, Lisa, he said quietly. The only way to fix it was to burn it all down. Chaos erupted. The woman lunged for Lisa, screaming, but the agents subdued her in seconds. Her father didn't resist. He simply sank to the floor, defeated, years of burden etched into every line on his face. Lisa stood there, shaking, heart pounding in her ears. She'd uncovered the truth. She'd survived the network that had buried so many. But the cost, it would never leave her. Her father would be indicted. The town would never look the same again. But maybe, just maybe, justice would finally begin. As they led the woman and her father away in cuffs, Lisa turned to Marla and whispered, We're going home. But even as dawn broke on the horizon, her phone buzzed again. One final message. No name. No number. Just 6 chilling words. You only scratched the surface, Lisa. Weeks passed, but the weight of what had happened never truly left Lisa's shoulders. She walked through the town's main street now with a kind of quiet strength, one forged not from victory, but survival. The diner, once labeled a dump by that out-of-town businessman whose words had unknowingly set everything in motion, had reopened. It wasn't flashier or newer. The floors still creaked, the walls still held the smell of decades-old bacon grease, and the coffee was still a bit too strong. But now, it carried something far more powerful than appearances, truth. And for the locals who returned with hesitant footsteps and curious eyes, it became something sacred. Because every inch of it now stood not just as a place to eat, but as the epicenter of a buried legacy that had finally been dragged into the light. Lisa sat by the window most mornings, her mother now sitting across from her, recovering slowly, both physically and emotionally. Their conversations, once filled with assumptions and resentment, had become something quieter, deeper. They didn't need to fill every silence anymore. Sometimes sitting together was enough. Marla had gone back to her work at the library, but not before Lisa hugged her and said, You didn't just help me with the truth. You helped me remember who I am. Marla didn't say anything in return. She didn't have to. The town buzzed for a while after the story broke. News outlets circled for days. Headlines exploded across YouTube with trending tags like "Small Town Conspiracy Exposed," "Hero Daughter Outs Underground Network," and "Faked Death Leads to National Scandal." But like the woman warned, the outrage faded. The media moved on. The agents packed up. People stopped talking about the sting operation. But Lisa never stopped remembering. And neither did those who had truly been affected: survivors, victims' families, and people from neighboring towns who came forward with their own stories once the fear began to lift. Deputy Rayner had been cleared of suspicion and given recognition at the federal level, though he declined it all. He came to the diner once a week, always in civilian clothes. AAS for her father, he never asked for forgiveness. In the courtroom, he stood tall and accepted responsibility for what he'd built. The prosecution brought in files, audio recordings, and a full confession that painted a picture far more complex than even Lisa had imagined. He hadn't just built the network out of power or greed, but out of fear. Fear that the justice system would fail the very people he tried to protect. Somewhere along the way, his methods shifted. The lines blurred, and then they disappeared entirely. His sentence was long, but Lisa didn't attend the verdict for revenge. She went for closure. She looked him in the eyes one last time as the guards cuffed him, and he mouthed something she never shared with anyone. Maybe it was "I'm sorry," or maybe it was "thank you," but it didn't really matter. The damage was done, the lies exposed, and the reckoning had finally come. Elway's sitting in the booth by the door, like he was guarding the place out of habit. Lisa never asked him what came next for him. He'd been through enough. And maybe some things didn't need words. Still, not everything tied itself into a neat little bow. Because a week after her father was sentenced, another envelope arrived at the diner. No return address. Inside it was a single photograph, her father standing beside someone Lisa didn't recognize, shaking hands in front of a military-grade facility in Nevada. The date? Years before he died. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in red ink. "You think this ended with him?" Lisa didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell Marla or Rayner. Instead, she locked the photo in a small metal box under the floorboards of the diner. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it was nothing. But one thing was clear. Some shadows never disappear completely. And yet, despite the lingering questions, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was okay, but because she had finally faced the truth. The kind that doesn't fit in headlines or hashtags, but lives in the choices people make when no one's watching. The diner may still be called a dump by some strangers passing through, but now it held something far more valuable than polish and paint. It held stories, memories, a legacy reclaimed. And Lisa? She wasn't just the daughter of a man who vanished. She was the woman who brought everything to light, even if the shadows weren't quite done with her yet.